Hello everyone, welcome to another CCE training video. Today we're going to be discussing debate and parliamentary procedure. We'll try to show some clips of actual debate at the end, that way you have a good idea of what to expect when you get to the conference. But for now, to explain the basics, we have some CCE officers who are joining us. If you guys want to introduce yourselves.
Hi, my name is Jackson Payton. I'm a senior at Brentwood Academy. I am the Red House floor leader at the High School Youth and Government Volunteer Conference, and I've been doing GIG all 4 years of high school, and I volunteered at middle school conferences, and I was an officer at last summer's ZIG conference as well.
Hi, I'm Hadiyah Kruger. I'm a senior at Brentwood Academy. I am the Speaker Pro Temp of the Blue Senate this year. This is my 4th and final year of YIG, and I've enjoyed every single minute.
I'll just kick things off by going over the broad timing and sort of format of debate. Every bill that you hear at Youth and Government will follow the same format and timing style. Patrons will have 2 minutes to introduce their bill. That will be followed by 2 minutes of technical questions, con-pro debate for 5 minutes, 1 minute per round for 5 rounds, and then a 1 minute summation, followed by some time for voting and ranking procedure, depending on whether you're in chamber or in committee. Technical questions is the first part of debate that you'll be involved in. They occur after the introduction, and there are chances for members of the General Assembly to clarify items in a bill. These are typically quick, non-debatable questions that can be answered with a yes, no, a number, a statistic, or a definition. Technical questions will be asked in the order in which the chair recognizes the speaker. So if the chair calls on 5 people at the same time, they will go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, asking their technical questions. To ask a technical question, state your name and school, then ask your question. So, Tyler Dorr, Center for Civic Engagement. What will be the cost of this measure? If somebody has already asked your question, either ask a different one or state your name and school and say, my question has been answered. That will let the chair know that they can move on to the next person. What makes a good technical question is that it can be answered very quickly by the patrons. It's something that's not debatable. So good questions would be, what is the total cost of this bill? What is the population of this county? How large will the fine be for violating this law? A bad technical question would be something like, how dare you? Or can you prove that this will work? That might be better addressed in con-pro debate. Technical questions are a fact-finding exercise. So some techniques that you can use are, you can use a technical question to draw attention to something you plan to discuss in a pro-con speech. If one of your criticisms of a bill is that it doesn't have a good enforcement mechanism, you can ask in a technical question, can you identify the section of the bill where it talks about enforcement? Because that's a quick answer. They'll either say section 4 or they won't have an answer. And then you can talk about how there's no enforcement in a pro-con speech, and you've set yourself up well. You can also use a technical question to draw out a statistic or research that helps bolster an argument that you want to make.
So after you go through the 2 minutes of introduction and 2 minutes of technical questions, we'll move into 5 minutes of pro-con debate. So it's not 5 minutes for each round, it's 5 minutes total. So there are 5 rounds, each amounting to 1 minute long, and you go in the order of a con round, a pro round, a con round, a pro round, and a con round. There's one more con round than pro rounds because there's an extra pro in the time that's given to the patrons for both the introduction and the summation. So that extra con round balances that out and makes sure that both sides of a topic are fully being discussed and have their time to be listened to on the floor. So each of these rounds follows the same format, and you have the same options in each of the rounds. During your 1 minute for either a con or a pro round, you have 3 options, and you may do 3 different things. So the first thing you can do is address the floor, which is basically talking to the other delegates on the floor, stating your opinion of a matter, and the patrons of the bill won't be able to weigh in on it. Or you can ask the patrons a series of possible questions. If you are a little unclear on what a bill is trying to accomplish, how it's going to accomplish its main goals, or any other questions about the bill, you may ask them during this time. You just begin and then go up to the patrons and start asking them questions. This is not a time to address the floor, as you would do that in addressing the floor. Your third option is you may yield the remainder of your time to a fellow delegate. So this one has to be done as the second option after one of the other two. And it basically says you're not using the whole minute, so you want to give your time to another delegate. So when you go up to start either asking questions or addressing the floor, you'll first say your name and school, and then you'll do your statement of intent, which either sounds like, may I address the floor, or do the patrons yield to a possible series of questions? After you do one of those first, you then have the option to do the other one that you didn't just do, or yield time to a fellow delegate. Now that I've gone over those basics, I'm going to basically discuss what each one of those looks like. So starting with addressing the floor. As I said earlier, this is basically your time to tell your opinion on a bill. If you're in a pro slot, you need to make sure that when you address the floor, it's discussing some of the highlights of the bill or why you think it should succeed and be passed into law. You will be out of order if you start talking con on a bill when it's a pro round, and the vice versa is the same. So if you are talking pro on a bill in a con round, you're also out of order. So if you're in a con round, a good way to think about addressing a floor is that's when you want to tell the other delegates why you think that this bill will fail or hurt the state as a whole. So con speeches especially sometimes fall into personal attacks on a patron, and that is also out of order. You should never be attacking someone, and you should only ever make comments on the topic or the contents of a bill, and never anything about how someone is dressed, the words that they're saying, their speaking style, or anything personally aimed at them. Those types of attacks are not upheld with the YMCA's core values and will be deemed out of order. So as I said earlier, to address the floor, all you do is say, may I address the floor, and then start talking. Now we're going to talk about our second options. You can then ask the patrons a series of possible questions. This is your opportunity to have dialogue with the authors of a bill and start to see more of what they see in the bill that you may not be seeing. In a con round, this is a great time to ask either neutral or negative questions. Those are questions that may highlight a flaw of the bill or make the audience a little more skeptical about whether or not the bill will succeed. And in a pro round, you want to ask questions that highlight a success of the bill or maybe even compare it to precedents in other states. These questions are a bit more open-ended and can be more argumentative than those technical questions that you asked in the round before. You can ask any type of question, and they don't have to be met with specific things like a number, a statistic, or a simple yes or no answer. Your questions should have one focus and should ultimately build to a larger point. If you ask a lot of different questions that seem unrelated, you've kind of wasted the round and you're not making the point that you need to make. This is basically a way of having that dialogue with the patrons of the bill, but also being able to convey a point as if you were addressing the floor without explicitly addressing the floor. And one important thing to remember is that you don't have to have necessarily pro or con questions in a pro or con round. While you will be out of order if you ask a con question in a pro round or a pro question in a con round, your questions can be pretty neutral. If it's something that you are genuinely curious about and don't know if it's going to highlight the bill in a positive or a negative way, don't not ask it. Pick a con or a pro round that you think the question will work, and if it turns out to be a negative answer, that's an unfortunate consequence, but you're not out of order as long as you're not intentionally trying to con them in a pro round or pro them in a con round. So a really important thing is being able to make an effective point with your questions. Like I said earlier, it's always good to be able to have your questions build to a common point. But I'm going to give some more specific examples of questions that you can ask so you can feel more confident about using a series of possible questions in a round. So let's take, for example, a bill that aims at reducing drunk driving in the state of Tennessee by increasing the punishments for fourth offender DUIs. Good pro questions in this would be questions like, how many DUIs were there in the state of Tennessee last year? How many people were killed in DUI accidents? Or you could even leave it a little more open-ended and ask the patrons What concerns do you have with the state of drunk driving in the state of Tennessee? Or how do you see this bill as combating this issue and potentially saving lives? All of those questions are really good for pro rounds, and they have a targeted benefit of being able to support the bill and to highlight its protections. Now, if you wanted to go into a con round and ask a series of possible questions, you would, with that same bill, you would want to ask more questions such as, what will this cost? In paying for this, will we be giving up anything else? Will this create overcrowding in our prison systems? All three of those questions highlight unforeseen consequences that could ultimately lead to the bill being less successful. So, just a quick reminder, if you want to do this and ask a series of questions, first state your name and school, and then say, do the patrons yield to a possible series of questions? Now, the final option that has to be done after either addressing the floor or asking a series of possible questions is yielding the remainder of your time to a fellow delegate. I detailed this one pretty much earlier, but it's basically giving the rest of your 1 minute time in a round to another delegate in the room. So if you have some really good questions for the patrons, but those questions only take 25 seconds, this is a really good way to not waste a pro or a con round and give your time to someone else. You may yield to anyone in the room, but it's pretty poor etiquette to yield to another member of your bill team or someone who's already spoken on the bill. I know with Zoom, it's hard to see all of the raised hands, so chairs are more than happy to help you pick someone if you're struggling to find someone with their hand raised who wants to speak on a bill. Now, when yielding time to someone, you want to try to find people who haven't spoken because the conference is a weekend long and there is plenty of time for everyone to be able to speak. So if you see someone whose hand is raised who hasn't talked yet, try to call on them. That'll not only give them a boost, it'll also encourage them and be a nice way to just care for them remotely. To yield your time, all you have to do is state your name and school. Then you'll say whether or not you want to address the floor or ask the patrons a series of possible questions. And then you'll just say, and may I reserve the right to yield the remainder of my time to a fellow delegate. And then once you finish speaking, you'll say, I yield the remainder of my time to blank, whatever that delegate's name is. In my case, that would be, and I yield the remainder of my time to Peyton. You always want to address delegates by their last names, and you don't want to call them by country, school, or any other identifier. It's best etiquette to call them by their last names, and that's a really good way to show respect, not only for the conference, but for that specific delegate. The yielded delegate will be told by the chair how much time they have left, so that's a great way for them to be able to think quickly on the spot about how much time they have left. And finally, the yielded delegate can only ask the floor a series of, address the floor or ask the patrons a series of possible questions. They can't yield their time to another delegate or do both of those things once they've been yielded time to. Basically, in each round of debate, whether it's con or pro, you can only do two things. So that can be one delegate addressing the floor and asking the patrons a series of possible questions, or that can be one delegate doing one of those things, yielding their time to another delegate, and that delegate doing one of those things. And it's really hard to remember all of this after I've just said it really quickly. So your bill book is a great resource for you to be able to have access to those scripts of what to say. I know there's a lot of different things to say and a lot of different ways to ask questions or a different parliamentary procedure, and it can be overwhelming to learn. So if you ever feel like you're forgetting how to say something, find it in your bill book. And if you can't find the page in your bill book, just private message your chairs and they'll be more than happy to help you out. But one important thing to remember is before addressing the floor or doing any of that, you always need to state your name and school first before saying anything else. And that concludes our con-pro round of parliamentary procedure.
The one tip I would have about keeping track of the right language to use would be, if you're more of a first-time delegate, try to watch some of the seniors or juniors do a round first, or somebody that's been there previously, and then you throughout the weekend you'll start picking up what time you can use what thing.
Yeah, I think the only other thing I'd add is I would encourage people to practice and try things even if you're not completely sure. The first day of the conference and the second day too are really there for practice and are meant for you to improve your parliamentary procedure skills in a safe and low stakes kind of environment. Nobody is born knowing all of this stuff. It's strange and often archaic, and it takes some time to become comfortable with it and to master it. So don't be afraid to try things out on the first day. The worst thing that can happen is your chair tells you how to do it better next time. And by the end of the weekend, you'll be speaking it like a second language.
An amendment is an official change to the bill. Once an amendment is adopted at YIG, that change carries forward to all subsequent chambers. Amendments are phrased as removals, additions, or substitutions. So it could be something like, in line 4, remove the word "the." An amendment cannot alter the fundamental nature or title of the bill and must be germane to the bill. Now, one thing you may be wondering is, what is a germane amendment? A germane amendment is something that is relevant and prevalent to the bill. An amendment must be submitted prior to the start of committee. There are two types of amendments. One is friendly, and the other is unfriendly. Friendly amendments are offered by a bill's patrons or their allies. It amends the bill in a way that the patrons support. So something along the lines of taking out something that would apply to only one section of Tennessee rather than the state as a whole. A friendly amendment may be introduced and voted on immediately. Next, you have an unfriendly amendment. Those are offered by a party that seeks to amend the bill in a way that the original authors of the bill do not support. Unfriendly amendments must be debated, and the format for that debate would be 1 minute for an introduction by the amendment sponsor, 1 round of con, 1 round of pro, and 1 final con and summation from the bill's patron. Only 1 amendment may be entertained per bill, and it must be motioned to be recognized. A motion is a formal request that the committee do something. You must be recognized to give a motion, and not all motions are in order at all times. You need to raise your hand on Zoom to be recognized for a motion now. That's a little different than when we do it in person, and you cannot just call out a motion. Once the chair recognizes you, state your name and school, followed by "I move to." Some common motions that you'll hear all the time over the course of this weekend would be a motion to recognize the amendment on the table. This would be in order before the last con speech. And it would say something like, "I move to recognize the amendment on the table." This requires a second and voice majority to pass, then prompts the chair to read the amendment to the committee. Another common amendment is motion to adjourn or recess. This is in order after committee business has concluded or before scheduled breaks. Next, you would have previous question. This is in order after the first pro speech and before the last con speech. This will officially end con-pro debate. And it would go something along the lines of, "I move the previous question." This requires a second and voice majority to pass. Previous question motions are typically used when a bill has a lot of backing support behind it, so after a couple rounds, it's pretty obvious to see how the bill will turn out. And it's a good way to even out some of the time constraints for the weekend. Next, you have points of order or information. These are rule clarifications or specific factual questions directed at the chair. This should not be used as a substitute for debate, and only in order after you've been recognized. And lastly, you have intent speakers. In chambers, con-pro debate will be preceded by up to 2 intent speakers. These intent speakers get to deliver a 2-minute con or pro speech. These speakers are chosen the night before using our intent speaker sign-up form, so anyone selected has extra time to research their speech and write something really persuasive.
So I think the easiest solution to that is really just stress knowing where the script is and having that easily accessible, so that if you have those questions and your chair isn't able to respond to you, or you want to be able to ask a question quickly, just know where that is and always be able to find it, because that's a really important thing that is easily lost or forgotten about. And so I think that's something that the script is really good for that.
One question I got asked a bunch at Model UN was when could you motion to extend pro-con debate? Because that usually when we have bills that are usually debatable and they're very good and well written, a lot of people want to talk, and because there are only so many rounds of con pro debate, it's hard to get everyone in. So I think one thing to remember is kind of understand the time constraints we're under. If it's a bill kind of towards the middle, it's a little bit easier to extend pro-con debate rather than at the very beginning or the very end, seeing as though we either want to get as many as we can in, or we want to give everybody the same amount of time and try not to go as late as possible.
Two things that I want to bring up that happen less frequently, but are still good to know about, are sometimes you'll hear delegates making points of order or points of information. Just to clarify the purpose and uses of those, a point of order is only used when you believe a breach of parliamentary procedure has occurred. A great example of this that happens regularly is a chair might forget to do a pro round and move right from the first con round into the second con round. An appropriate way to bring up that mistake to the chair is to click the go faster button indicating that you need to be recognized immediately. And when you're recognized, say point of order. I think we skipped the first pro round. Most of the time the chair will realize that they've made a mistake and be able to correct it at that point. It's not used just because something happened that you didn't like, or it's not used if a chair rules something out of order. They may be ruling something out of order because of time constraints or something. The other thing is points of information. These are needed very rarely, but what they are is a call for an impartial party like the chair to provide information to the chamber about something that is under debate. An example of when this would actually be appropriate would be if in answering a question, the speaker said, I believe this is addressed in the 13th Amendment, but I'm not completely sure. At that point, if the party who is asking the question doesn't have information about the 13th Amendment and the patron doesn't have information about the 13th Amendment, someone from the chamber could offer a point of information asking the chair to look up and read the 13th Amendment to the chamber. Legitimate uses of this are very rare at youth in government. Most of the time, these issues can be resolved by asking the patron a possible series of questions or just by addressing the floor.